Welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Bennett and I'll be the MC for tonight. Welcome to the International Center of Integrative Systems on the International Symposium on Masks and Oral Health. Our center is all about educating people on the power of systems thinking. We are dedicated to educating the public on how systems thinking can create a better world. And we are also in the midst of building an educational programs for K through 12. Our center provides research, education, and programs to explore complex systems such as innovation, food, communications, healthcare. We run regular educational seminars, workshops to enable systems thinking. We identify, support youth who demonstrate their ability to innovate into integrating multiple systems, product development, business, and customer service. One of the programs that we run is Innovation Core, which aims to provide mentorship and guidance to young innovators from the age of 14 to 18 to help them understand the dynamics of innovation and systems. And that includes providing them mentoring, financing, and support. We also run the Certified Clean Food Project, which has been identified as a systems-based approach to understand the nature of food. You may have seen our certified clean labels on household products at places such as Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. So today, over the next 2 hours, this is the agenda we're going to follow. We're going to go over the history of masks. Then we will talk more about oral health and systems health. Next, we're going to discuss clinical observations of mask wearing. Followed by the systems biology of periodontal disease and oral microbiome. Next, we will cover the effects of masks on oral microbiome and the implications for oral health. And we'll finish up with some Q&As and the future research questions and how we will proceed after these findings. So the history of masks, I'd like to introduce Michelle Jeffalone. She is the executive director of the center. She has a bachelor's in science and an MBA, and Michelle will be going over the history of masks.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'd just like to welcome everyone to the center's symposium tonight. Thank you all for joining us. So the history of masks from the medieval era, the earliest documented use of masks in the 17th century by doctors were beak doctors, and they were treating the plague in Europe. And you can see the picture on the left has the doctor, and that was the shape of their mask. It actually looked like a beak. And these masks were supposedly filled with herbs such as clove and cinnamon, as well as liquids. And they were meant to protect from the blight, the airborne miasma, which was considered the cause of the plague back then. In the modern era, the masks development traces its origin to the emergence of germ theory hypothesis. The mouth bandage, which you can see on the left-hand side, was gained popularity in the medical community around the 1890s. And then the surgical mask appeared in the operation rooms during the 1920s in Germany and America. And initially, the only ones that used the masks were the nurses and the interns, but the doctors didn't wear them. And the bottom left picture are those masks. And what's interesting is they didn't cover their noses, which I thought was just a curiosity. The Spanish flu pandemic hit the world in 1918 through 1919. Common people, not just medical professionals, were mandated to wear gauze face masks to limit the spread of the disease. On the left, you can see what appears to be nurses and medical professionals wearing masks. And non-compliance led to fines, public ridicule, and sometimes jail time. So, however, the efficacy of these masks was widely questioned by the medical establishment. And on the bottom left, you can see there was posters up saying wear a mask And that's the style of mask that people wore back then. So pro versus anti, the controversy. There was a controversy on mask wearing even then. One position was that mask wearing was a way to stamp out the Spanish flu. And you can see this is an example of a posting about the Spanish flu, and that wearing a mask would protect people. And the Anti-Mask League fought against the mandatory and compulsory wearing of masks. And they would hold meetings and have rallies to coordinate to stop wearing masks. And you can see that on the bottom left. Now back to the future. The controversy continues today. On the top left, you can see that this is a common sign you see outside of many businesses, most businesses, I would say, saying that you can't enter unless you wear a face mask. And on the bottom left, you'll notice that many people across the US are holding rallies and feeling like they're being muzzled, and they're saying no to mandatory masks. And our center is dedicated to applying a systems approach to go beyond pro and anti dialectics. A systems approach offers us a way to appreciate complexity and gain insights. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Michelle. So next, Dr. Daneker, who has a PhD in systems biology, is going to go over the clinical observations of mask wearing.
Thanks, Jennifer. So these are some of the observations that dentists across the country have been noticing over the period of last 9 months since the pandemic began. So they're looking at how the mask wearing by lots of people is affecting the oral health during this pandemic. And what they have noticed is that there's an increase in the tooth decay because of mask wearing. It also has led to inflamed gums, which leads to periodontal disease. And there's an increased incidence of bad breath as well as gum disease. So there are several other incidents. They have come up with a term now for this, and they're calling it mask mouth, which is basically all these conditions that are a direct result of wearing mask over a prolonged period of time. And what they're also noticing is that if they're left untreated, then this particular disease, the gum disease, actually has been shown to result in several other diseases like cardiovascular disease, such as stroke and heart attack. So there's a mounting evidence now from the dental professionals who are seeing several manifestation of these conditions in their patients. So one of the doctors out of New York, the dentist, Dr. Rob Raimondi, he is quoted here saying that we're seeing inflammation in people's gums that have been healthy forever and cavities in people who have never had them before. So it's kind of a new occurrence in the oral health area, and they are attributing it to masks. And some of the solutions that the dentists are recommending to overcome this include drinking more water, reduce your caffeine intake, using humidifiers, using mouthwashes that are alcohol-free, and scraping your tongue and avoid smoking. So this is another example of the increased incidence of mask mouth out of UK here. They're also, one of the hypotheses that they are promoting here is that because of the extended period of mask wearing, it makes people breathe through their nose for longer periods, which causes their mouth to dry out. And that leads to the decreased production of saliva in their mouth, which actually neutralizes the acids and prevents tooth decay and gum disease. So because of that lower production of saliva, you're having more pH in your oral cavity that is causing the tooth decay and gum disease that the dentists all over the country are experiencing. So that's the observations that people are having in clinic. So if we look at the existing research on what is the effect of masks, whether they act as a protective measure against the spread of disease. So we see several studies which are kind of contradicting that that finding. So one of the first one, well, this is what the CDC has put forward, that if you use cloth face covering, it will help you slow the spread of the disease. And they have a detailed guideline on how to wear those face coverings. So they can be either cloth mask, surgical mask, or N95 masks, which are supposed to be the gold standard of facial coverings. And the government is also taking a proactive stance in having people wear masks in public. So this is an example of an order that the Massachusetts government issued. This kind of harkens back to the days of Spanish flu, where they had the mask mandate. But if you look at the the current status of the science, we see a different picture emerging. So we know that it is a controversial topic. On one hand, you have the CDC recommending that face coverings for not only healthcare workers and sick patients, but also for the general public. And they're recommending the surgical mask or cloth mask, or the least is a cloth face covering, in the face of no conclusive clinical evidence for the effectiveness of all these measures. So let's look at one of the possible reason why it is still inconclusive is because the size of the virus might be too small to be filtered out. So these are some of the studies that have come out since the pandemic began, and they also, and some of these studies also have looked at the efficacy of these masks, different types of masks, on the spread of the disease or filtration of the microbes. And we'll go look at one by one of what these studies are showing. So one of the first studies that we have here is about cloth mask, comparative differences between cloth mask and surgical mask, and how effective they are in filtering the SARS-CoV-2 in the COVID patient. So this is a study that came out in Annals of Internal Medicine. It was actually in April, when the pandemic was in full swing. So what they had found was that in the study, they showed that particles in the range of 0.04 to 0.2 micrometers can penetrate the surgical masks. Whereas the size of the SARS-CoV particle, which is the SARS virus, which is very similar to COVID-2, the COVID-19 particle, and that size is 0.08 to 0.14. So obviously, this is much more smaller than what the masks can filter out. So that shows that these type of masks, the surgical mask, did not perform very well in this particular study. So there's another study. Actually, these are the detailed results of this particular study, where you can see how they actually looked at 4 different patients. These are the characteristics of the patient group, and they found out what are the results for this particular study, which basically said that surgical masks were not that effective. And that study also looked at the cotton mask, and they also concluded that the cloth mask also were not really effective in filtering the virus. So this is one example of a detailed clinical study that had looked at in detail the 2 types of masks, the surgical and the cloth mask, and they didn't find them effective. As they conclude here in their discussion section, that neither surgical nor cotton mask effectively filter the SARS-CoV-2 during the coughs by infected patients. So they are unlikely to be an effective filter for the virus. The second study that we have here looked at almost 15 hospitals, and they looked at the cloth masks and whether they, what kind of effect they have on the infection risk among the healthcare workers. So here they're not looking at the patients, but actually the healthcare workers. So this is the study design. So they screen the patient, screen the subjects by using this design. And these are their results. So what they found here was that the likelihood of people, there a risk of infection for the people wearing the type of mask. So here they looked at medical masks as well as cloth masks, and they compared them together. So one of the key finding was that, they said ones who wore the cloth mask were 13 times more likely to get the influenza-like illness compared to the ones who wore medical masks. So here they are showing that the the cloth masks are 13 times less efficient than the medical grade mask in preventing or in getting acquiring the influenza-like illnesses. So the penetration of particles through cloth mask was 97%. That means if you have 100 particles of virus on one side of the mask, then 97 of them will make their way through inside the mask, and the person will inhale those. Whereas for the medical mask, it was 44%. That means of the 100, only 44 will make through or cross the mask barrier. So again, this goes on to show the inefficiency of both clinical as well as the surgical masks. And this is a clinical study, it's kind of a gold standard of scientific research. So in their conclusion, they say that the result caution against the use of cloth mask for sure, and moisture retention, reuse of cloth mask, and poor filtration may result in increased risk of infection. So one of the main reasons people were recommending cloth mask was that their ability to be reused after washing. So what this study is finding is that because of that, the moisture retention and the reuse, there is a poor filtration, and that actually will increase the risk of infection. In the third study, they had looked at the, again, cloth masks, infection risk in the healthcare workers, where this study kind of demonstrated that subjects with COPD who had the this kind of a shortness of breath issue going on wear only N95 masks. That means they only recommend that for this type of patient group, they recommend only N95 masks and not the other kind of masks. So, and again, these are just a few of those studies, and I've summarized here some more studies that actually provide some evidence against the use of efficacy of the mask. So the first bullet here says that wearing N95 masks for a prolonged period of time, more than 1 hour, can increase the risk of headaches in people prone to headaches. So, people, usually the frontline people who are made to wear these masks for more than 1 hour, and if they're already prone to headaches, then they're more likely to have headaches. People with COPD, actually wearing the N95 mask increase the shortness of breath and breathing discomforts for them, for that patient population as well. N95 masks more than 2 hour period did not really affect those with the coronary heart disease. So this is a finding that says that if you have the heart disease and if you have to wear the mask for more than 2 hours, then it is not really affecting your disease condition. So the last but one finding is pretty interesting. This is for pregnant women. And what they say was that if the pregnant women were using the mask for more than 1 hour, the gas exchange levels, that means the levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen in their blood, were being affected. So that's it's a kind of a serious side effect of having a mask. Wearing N95 masks induced a mean of 37% reduction in air exchange volume in elderly people, people with illness such as chronic lung disease, heart disease, and stroke, as well as a pregnant woman. What this means is that if you're wearing N95 mask, then the amount of air that you breathe in and the exchange of oxygen that takes place in your lungs is reduced by almost 37%. So that's a kind of a damning evidence against wearing these type of masks over a period of long times. In addition to that, I think we looked at this one as well. So breathing through N95 mask materials have been shown to impede the gas exchange, and it adds to the overall workload that your lungs as well as metabolic system has to perform. That means it is putting stress on your lungs as well as metabolism, and the benefits of using N95 mask to prevent serious and emerging infectious disease should be, so this is a kind of a caution that they're saying, it might prevent the emerging infectious disease, but also you have to take into consideration the consequences that are associated with extended N95 mask usage, such as increased headaches, low or impaired gas exchange, increased stress levels on your lungs and your metabolism. So that's kind of a cautionary note that they're ending this study on. So in summary, we know that CDC and state governments are recommending and sometimes demanding masks and imposing fines. Masks that are being recommended are mainly medical mask and cloth mask or cloth face covering. And currently, this was in the beginning, it was true when N95 quantity was limited. They were recommending it only for the healthcare workers. What we found in the scientific literature was that medical masks and cloth masks are unlikely to be an effective barrier against virus transmission, whereas N95 masks can disturb gas exchange after prolonged use and may pose a risk for a elderly pregnant women population, as well as those with pre-existing conditions such as COPD and heart disease. So in addition to that, we also have noticed that mask wearing has led to psychologically kind of antisocial situations. So it is leading to social isolation is also actually shown to downregulate antiviral compounds that the body naturally produces. And it also upregulates the inflammatory compounds, so that causes severe inflammation. So that's the social effect of mask wearing. So, it's causing social isolation, which is causing psychological disease, as well as some of the, it is dampening the body's immune response as well through downregulation of antiviral compounds. So the next issue that I wanted to walk you guys through is about oral health and systems health, which is very pertinent to our discussion here. So we wanted to look at the issue of oral health and how oral health actually affects the systemic health, that means your overall health, and how and connect it with the use of mask and how the mask is affecting the oral health and thereby affecting the overall health of the human body. So if you look at the oral ecosystem, so you have basically the oral health emerges out of interactions between the oral tissue and oral microbiome. So the oral tissue has two components to it: the bone, basically the teeth as well as the jawbone, and the soft tissue, which is composed of your gums, your cheek, your tongue, and the salivary glands. And the oral microbiome, I'll go a little bit into detail in the later slides, but that interacts with the oral tissue, and that interaction results in whether you are going to have a healthy oral cavity or you're going to have a diseased condition. So some of the most common oral diseases in terms of teeth, you have tooth decay. It's also called caries, cavities, and teeth sensitivity. Most of people are probably familiar with these. Then you have the gum diseases. One of the most common one is the gingivitis, which is basically the inflammation of gums, and the periodontitis, which is the chronic inflammation of gums, and which is much more serious than the gingivitis. The third common oral disease is oral cancer, and then you have the anoma or mouth ulcers. So if you look at the oral health and how it affects the different body systems, what we find in the literature is that actually oral health is a key driver of overall health. That means health of several organ systems. For example, oral health affects heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, hypertension, anxiety, that's the psychological disease. COPD, which is the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It is also implicated in preterm and low birth weight. Glaucoma is been associated with pancreatic cancer as well, and the arthritis. So there is a strong linkage between your oral health and the health of your overall other organ systems. And one of the connections between the oral health and the systemic health is the oral microbiome. So not only it is crucial in maintaining oral health, but also oral microbiome is implicated in maintaining your systemic health. So we have a very diverse oral microbiome. So the diversity comes in the form of different organism groups that include bacteria, fungi, viruses, archaea, and protozoa, as well as the location at which these microorganisms exist. For example, your microbiome or the oral microbiome is different on the teeth as compared to that on your tongue, as well as the cheeks or the gums. So different places have different bacteria or different fungi, and because of that interaction with the oral cavity, they maintain that oral health. The benefits of microbiome include that they protect the oral cavity from the bad bacteria, as well as they also prevent the disease that we'll see in the later slides. So some of the bacteria that are associated, the oral bacteria that are associated with different diseases. So here, studies have shown that the oral bacteria, P. gingivalis as well as spirochetes are implicated in Alzheimer's disease. So if you have an imbalance or extra growth in these type of bacteria, that is linked with the Alzheimer's disease. So periodontitis, which is the most common disease, the red complex bacteria, the gingivalis, denticola, forsythia, and the methanogens are actually involved in pathogenesis of periodontitis. And the streptococcus species are involved in producing caries. So we have several of these oral bacteria, including gingivalis, the intermedia, nigrescens, and rectus involved in cardiovascular disease. Several forms of streptococcus are involved in cystic fibrosis. You have these bacteria involved in creation of diabetes as well as pancreatic cancer. There are several bacteria involved in creating rheumatoid arthritis, esophageal cancer, as well as colorectal cancer. So you can see that the significance of the oral bacteria or oral, what we call the oral microbiome in creating different diseases. So in addition to that, we also have a very vibrant immune system that is present in our oral cavity. So we have immune cells such as neutrophils, T cells, B cells, monocytes, macrophages, and dendritic cells that actually get trained by the bacteria that are present in our oral microbiome. So it is actually involved in how these immune cells are differentiated. That means from the stem cells, they become a particular type of immune cells, and also the maturation of those immune cells. That means they get ready to fight the bacteria. So this is the way that the oral microbiome is involved in the maintenance of the immune system, and the balance between the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory processes in the immune system is a key function of the oral microbiome. So if that balance is destabilized, then you end up with oral disease or other diseases like heart disease and some of the cancers. So that brings us to a kind of an in-depth look at the periodontal disease. So how does this disease get itself manifested? What are the components or the cell types or tissue types in the oral cavity that are involved in a generation of this particular disease? And what are the molecular systems that are involved in the pathogenesis of this disease? And this is called the systems biology. So the way that we understand this disease is through understanding the systems that are involved in the oral cavity. So if you look at the oral cavity here, a snapshot of it, you have the bone in the form of teeth, as well as the jawbone. And you have the gum tissue, the pink gum tissue, and that's the soft tissue. That is implicated in the periodontal disease. So basically, the way that the disease manifests itself is inflammation starts and it affects the teeth and the jaw bones. It basically erodes your teeth and it destroys your jawbone as well as the gums. And it is resulting from the inflammation that is caused by the imbalance in the microbiome. The bad bacteria are outgrowing the good bacteria and creating the inflammatory environment where it starts attacking the gum as well as the teeth. So this is a, as is here, one of the most common oral disease. Almost 80% of the US adults have experienced some form of periodontal disease in their life.
Prabhakar, I'm here, Prabhakar. Yep, sorry.
Thank you. I also wanted to just chime in because we're getting a lot of great questions. As you have questions, because I know we're presenting a lot of information, please just look me up in the chat, Jennifer Bennett, and send me a private message. So at the end, when we do the Q&A, Dr. Dianaker and Dr. Shiva can answer your questions. And I also wanted to let people know that there's a lot of great information that's being covered, a lot of great graphs and research papers. You will have access to these at the end. So we'll go over that. So I know a lot of people are asking that question in the chat as well. So we have Dr. Shiva with us here now. As many of you know, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai is the inventor of email. He has 4 degrees from MIT, including his PhD in biological engineering, and is a Fulbright scholar. So him and Dr. Dianaker are going to be talking more about the systems biology of periodontal disease.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone. One of the things, I know Dr. Dianaker just briefly started the process. Thank you, Dr. Dianaker, for giving the great introduction. And thank you, Michelle, our executive director of our center. Appreciate it. Systems biology, you notice there's a word called systems in front of it. And what this means is that we don't study the parts of biological systems. So if you look at the whole body, we're not going to just study the nose or the eyes or the legs or the teeth. We study all the components. So when we look at the issue of oral health or periodontal disease specifically here, we're going to look at all the components. The research we're about to share with you is frankly hot off the press. We've been working on this for about 3 years with a number of collaborators at Harvard University, at BU. So you're getting essentially very, very literally research that does not exist anywhere else in the world. And I say that without hyperbole. So next slide. As Prabhakar, as Dr. Dianaker was sharing here, he was going through the structure here. Any one of you who've gone to your dentist, and the dentist starts jabbing it and you say, hey, your gums are bleeding, or you get your x-ray done and sometimes you see the tooth decay. Well, I think the key point Dr. Dianaker's talk has just shared is that this has to do with the bacteria in your mouth. In the work we've started doing, there's close to 700 different types of bacterium, at least in your mouth. Your mouth is literally a jungle. It has various types of bacteria, as Dr. Dianaker identified, in different parts. So it's like, there's different, you can go back to that. Yeah, so you can see that the bacteria, it's like, there's people who live here and there's different kinds of people who live here. Essentially, they're ecologically motivated in different places. So the oral microbiome, you have fungi, you have bacteria, viruses, you have protozoa, and they live, as you can see, in these different areas of your mouth. Next, if you can go back to that, Prabhakar, Dr. Dianaker. So what you'll see here is here in different parts of this, when periodontal disease kicks in, the deepening of the pocket or the inflammation or the plaque in the calculus or the reduced bone level, it's occurring by the perturbations, which means your microbiome should be at a certain level of different bacteria that are all living together happily. And some phenomenon takes place. It could be genetic, it could be food, and we'll get into this. And you're perturbing the conditions, and certain of the bad bacteria are more in population, and that leads to different aspects of disease. It's a very, very interesting area of research. Next. So these are some of the different microbial factors that have been identified, right? So those are some of those microbes, right? You can see the names. I'm not going to pronounce them, but the key one is P. gingivalis. You know, people say gingivitis. You're watching those Listerine commercials, gingivitis, et cetera. That's the bacteria that they're referring to. You have other kinds of things that also can cause periodontal disease, right? So when you look at these, there's 3 boxes here. What causes periodontal disease? The microbiome in blue, the modifiable factors that you can actually change through lifestyle. Give up smoking, you know, if you have type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, if you're taking certain drugs, if you notice the antihypertensives, the antihistamines, the narcotics, the sedatives, they affect your oral health. And then there's other non-modifiable factors, at least this is from Western medicine standpoint, right? Osteoporosis, certain hematological disorders, which could be genetic, or certain hormonal fluctuations. So I just want you to just take a look at these. And what you get an idea here is from a systems perspective. So we're not just looking at any one thing. We're not saying, hey, just stop smoking and you're going to be fine, or just attack this particular genetic issue. There's 3 different subsystems here, right? The genetics on the bottom, the ecological things, and then the microbial factors. And Dr. Dienerk, is there any other items you want to add to this that I've missed?
No, I think this is these are the main, when they talk about the risk factors for periodontal disease, they mention the microbial factors, the modifiable and the non-modifiable factors. The genetic factors are kind of grouped together in the non-modifiable.
Yeah, and I think when we look at we've listed here 6 of those microbial factors, and there's others, right? And more are being identified, but these are the ones that science today knows, at least from the work that we've been doing. Next. So one of the interesting things is that among the microbial factors, you can group them again. So if you zoom in on it, there's 2 groups. There's a moderate risk, you know, what we call the orange complex bacteria, and then the high risk, the red complex bacteria, right? So yes, you can lead to periodontal disease if you have the ones on the left, you know, Fusobacterium nucleatum, Prevotella intermedia, Streptococcus, you know, and so on, Campylobacter, et cetera. But the ones that you definitely know, if you have the other 3, it's a very, very high proclivity for you to get periodontal disease are those 3. Particularly the P. gingivalis and the others, right? And there could be others, but this is one of the important things that as of today in science, we've been able to identify these 2 groups. Next. So if you look at it from a balance, right, of microbiome, right, there's 2 that we're trying to balance here, right? The mutualistic, you know, there's the symbiosis. Symbiosis means what? Symbiosis is something good. You have things that live with you. They actually support certain biochemical functions. For example, the lactic acid bacteria, lactobacilli, right? This thing you need, if you ever go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, of these places, you get this in yogurt, if I'm right? You get this, lacto means from milk. Well, so those are the gram-positive bacteria. They work with you, your body looks for them, it needs them. And the lactic acid bacteria, LAB, produces antimicrobial proteins and bacterio, let me just make this a little bit smaller. They produce bacteriocins, okay? So these are important because what that means is not all bacteria are bad. These bacteria actually produce antibacterial effects. Very, very valuable. That's why, you know, some cultures, many cultures, if you look at Eastern European cultures, Indian culture, yogurt, or these fermented foods are an essential part of their diet. The other side of it is you have, someone's writing some stuff there, parasitic symbiosis, okay? These are bacteria that are things that are harmful. But you notice on the left side to the right side, there's this line, Prabhakar, if you can point that out, and it has a little hammer at the end, which means the gram-positive bacteria on the left stop the parasitic symbiosis. So this is what we mean, the microbiome balance. The stuff on the left, you have a lot of that, that'll actually suppress the stuff on the right. So this is why it's really, really important to have the healthy microbiome, the symbiotic microbiome, because that actually will suppress, in many ways, the bacteria which cause periodontal disease on the right. I hope that's clear. Next. Now, The other part of it we want to talk about, I mean, I've sort of said it, but just to make it clear, Streptococci sanguinis, right? Sanguine, if you look at the origin of that word, sanguine means, healthy, supportive to health. Well, those kinds of bacteria lead to a healthy periodontium, right? Which is the structures around your teeth, which support your gums, etc. Now, the reduction of these gram-positive bacteria increase the negative bacteria. Again, this is about the microbial balance. And you know what happens then? These three other bacteria, which we're talking about, Treponema denticola, Tannerella, Forsythensis, and Pori, I'm just going to call it P. gingivalis. These three increase, right? So you have more of the Streptococci sanguinis, these go down, you have less of it, this goes up. Very, very simple, but think about it just as a seesaw, and we'll come back to this. You have a seesaw, you have you want to balance it. Ideally, if you get an imbalance, you end up with periodontal disease, and you get those pockets, you go to the dentist, you floss and you're bleeding, okay? Next. Prabhakar, you may want to address
Sure.
here.
So when there is an imbalance in the microbiome, that means the good bacteria are not reproducing much, and there's an increase in the bad bacteria, especially these three. That leads to an increased gene expression, which controls these processes that are listed here. So once these processes are upregulated, that means more of these things are happening in those bacteria. These bacteria will outgrow even more than the healthy bacteria. It's like a vicious cycle. So they're promoting the gene expression of these processes, and that allows them to reproduce more. As they reproduce more, they're promoting these particular processes. So you have an imbalance that scale is shifting towards disease. So you have more bad bacteria that lead to periodontal disease.
Prabhakar, if you can stay on that slide, I just want to make a couple of points here. Again, just to emphasize here, there are three columns here. Each of these columns, just to be clear, is a different bacteria and the effects that they have. Now, if you go on the far right, you see P. gingivalis. When I looked at this earlier, I noticed that it down-regulates, Prabhakar, biotin synthesis, or upregulates it?
No, these are upregulation. These are the bacterial processes that get upregulated, and it's like a self regenerative.
Right. I just wanted you to state that. So all of these bacteria, these processes, when we say upregulation, it means you're turning on the pump or you're turning on the switch, and these things start happening. So you increase biotin synthesis, you increase, capsular polysaccharide synthesis, you increase all of these processes, and each one of these processes are involved in, gum disease, bacterial growth, pathogenic. It's not just any one thing. So that's why in systems biology, we're not saying, okay, we only want to go attack one thing. We're only going to focus on one thing. The reality is when you look at this, it's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's around 32 different processes, right? That get upregulated, 8 processes for each one of these different kinds of bacteria. Next. And I think from the microbiome imbalance, these things, these factors, these things result in certain level of virulence, which means effects that they actually exacerbate, make the problem worse, right? So for example, enzymes, right? When you have hyaluronidase or chondroitin sulfatase, these things on the right side, you see these decrease phagocytosis for invasion of chemotaxis inhibitors, right? So what they're doing is they're actually reducing your immune system. Liposaccharides. So these are the factors. So these bacteria, just to be clear, create the stuff in the left column. So you have more of those bacteria, they're like oozing out these chemicals, okay? So the bacteria, remember, they're factories. Bacteria are not just, just hanging out. They actually are machinery. So they create these enzymes, which start, decreasing phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is very, very important because that phagocytosis is when your body's macrophages go surround other viruses and kill them. So basically those enzymes reduce phagocytosis, which means you're reducing your immune health. The lipopolysaccharides, which is the second one, these lead to bone resorption and immunoglobulin protease. So this is what results in your bone starting to deteriorate. And fimbria and exopolysaccharide and outer membrane proteins, this leads to adhesion or attachment to host outer membrane. And Prabhakar, if I remember, that's the thing that supports more tartar buildup, right? You start creating tartar buildup.
The biofilm production, yeah.
What's that?
Biofilm production.
The biofilm production. There's a whole, the biofilm, think about it as almost as a shield, like a dome, and underneath that, the bacteria live. So there's a whole theory when people are looking at, for example, Lyme disease, you know, people start taking antibiotics and never works and it goes up and down. One of the important things that came out of that research is that if you go on certain diets, it'll help eliminate the biofilm. You remove the biofilm and then you can go kill the bacteria. But here, the biofilm gets produced because you have more of these exopolysaccharides, et cetera. And then another virulence factor, again, that's produced by those bad bacteria is collagenase, and it's a trypsin-like protease and gelatinase. And this is not good because this literally leads to degradation of plasma protease inhibitors and the destruction of periodontal tissue. This is where your gums are literally getting eaten away. And then you have aminopeptidase, and this causes degradation of iron transport protein, extremely important in the entire process of, blood flow and a whole bunch of phenomenon like that. But Prabhakar, I think you may want to comment on those other items on.
Yeah, so these are some of the other virulence factors that we'll come across later. They include lipoic acid, hemagglutinin, gingipains, and some of the outer membrane proteins from the bacteria, as well as the membrane vesicles.
But I think before we leave the slide, so just remember, you have different kinds of healthy bacteria, bad bacteria. These bad bacteria start oozing out these chemicals on the left. Those chemicals then have these different effects on your and gum health or oral health. Next. I love this slide because, and by the way, as Jennifer said, this is going to be recorded and it'll be accessible to those people who have access to the facilities on the site. But we're also going to make it as a journal, as a white paper that we're writing up. But here, what you see is, if you look at these three here, the bacterial factors, these are the actual chemicals that are being produced. I guess Robin Frost is writing some stuff. Hey, Robin. But you can see these are factors that are produced, okay? The first one is lipopolysaccharides, LPS. Again, these are the factors that are produced by those bad bacteria. You have PGNs, peptidoglycans, and then we have
teichoic acid,
LTAs, okay? And each one of these particular chemicals, if you want to think about it that way, or compounds, they then lead, and we're going to show you this, Prabhakar is going to walk you through the actual systems biology, but these bacterial factors then result in your cells creating these inflammatory markers, as you see, IL-1 beta, TNF alpha. In each different cell, in the epithelial cells, IL-8 is created, for example. In the macrophages, which are your innate immune system cells, a whole bunch of chemicals are upregulated. These are not good things you want in your tissues. In the endothelial cells, which are the cells, by the way, very important, that line your arteries. This is why we've talked about it. There's a close relationship between periodontal disease and cardiovascular disease. The endothelial is, if you looked at your heart and the arteries coming out, it's the surface of the arteries. Like if you went into a bathroom and if you looked at the tiles on the floor of your bathroom, the tiles on the floor of your arteries are endothelial cells. So those cells start creating those different chemicals, as you see in that whole column, based on the kind of input that's coming in. And then your fibroblast cells are very, very important from your immune systems. They start producing those chemicals, as well as your mast cells. So the key takeaway from this is the bad bacteria or the microbiome imbalance starts affecting many, many different cells and tissues in your body. Here we're looking at least 5 different cells, which are in different tissues in your body, not just in your mouth. They're in all different parts of your body. Next. This really gives you what we call the systems diagram, okay? Remember, when we talked about the immune system, some of you may have been involved in my talks, we talked about the immune system. We talked about the fact that when you have a weakened and dysfunctional immune system, no different than having a car without any shock absorbers, your car hits a pothole and it doesn't know how to handle it. It reacts in a violent way. Well, your immune system is not that different. If your immune system is weakened and dysfunctional, when your immune system sees an invader, like a virus or pathogen, your immune system overreacts. And when it overreacts, it attacks your own tissues. So just to be clear, your body, it's not a virus kills you. This whole unfortunate misdirection that's being done, unfortunately, by the scientific community, and no one's fully speaking to it, is, you see it in the footnotes, but it's not a virus or pathogen that kills you. It's a dysfunctional your own immune system attacking itself. And the reason I point this out, if you look at the bottom, where I want to start at, that is called the cytokine storm, okay? Well, that cytokine storm is getting created, if you go back to it, by an immune system of the T helper cells, the NK cells, and dendritic cells, which basically go out of whack. So if you start at the center now, we're looking at one of those bad bacterium, P. gingivalis. When that's in high proportion, look what's coming out of that center. There's 3 arrows coming out, meaning it attacks bone, the green. It attacks on the left, your soft tissue, okay? And it also attacks your immune system. So it's quite profound. When you have a lot of that bacteria, it's degrading your immune system, which is over on the yellow. It's degrading your bone, and it's degrading your soft tissue. And it's just acting, singularly. It creates a feedback loop that's not a good feedback loop. So you have a lot of the bacteria, if you just follow P. gingivalis, it destroys your immune system on your right, or it affects your immune system. Well, that leads to cytokine storm. And on the upper right, you see it creates a pro-inflammatory. Cytokines are chemicals which are messenger molecules. Okay, they're like messengers. That's what a cytokine is, cell-to-cell communication. So IL-17 gets created. Well, that's also causing bone tissue loss. So the bacteria is causing bone tissue loss directly, but the effect on your immune system has a double whammy effect on bone tissue. This is why when people have periodontal disease, they go to the doctor, they're seeing bone loss, and sometimes very rapid bone loss, because it's the immune system is lowered and the bacteria itself is affecting. But what's also quite profound is a crosstalk between the effect that occurs between the damage to the soft tissue on the left. When that gets damaged by the bacteria, that leads to, on the bottom left, gum tissue loss. You're literally losing gum tissue. And also, as you go to the right, that also increases, effects on degrading the immune system. So that has greater cytokine storm and has greater, release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So what you're looking at is not that A plus B gets C, it's A plus B, and a bunch of things can get you a lot of different events occurring, what we call a non-linearity in science. The other piece that you're seeing here is that when the immune system is attacked on the right, that not only increases bone tissue, but it crosstalks over, and you can see the different, it crosstalks over, and it also affects the soft tissue. All right, so this entire process, and also if you look at the bacteria in themselves, it's the LPS, the GPN, and the LTA. Prabhakar, if you go to the earlier slide. So these things, just to be clear, are affecting soft tissue. Go back, Prabhakar, thank you. So that's what the LPS, GPN, and LTA are. All right, and then obviously, so what you're looking at, go look at the sort of the flashes here: bone loss on the upper left, gum loss on the bottom left, and the cytokine storm that you see, which affects your immune system. Prabhakar, you may want to detail to people, the work that we've done. Again, this is hot off the press. No one has actually seen this. We can now look at the layers of each one of these, and we literally have mapped out we've gone through tens of thousands of individual scientific papers where typically people like to cherry pick. What we've done in this research is to organize it. And what you're seeing here is for the first time, all the molecular systems, every line here probably has, a couple of hundred papers behind it that we can validate. Each of these lines and these connections, Prabhakar will walk you through, is literally the circuit diagram of what we're seeing here in terms of the interactions of all these components. Prabhakar, would you like to share that with people?
Sure. So what you see here is a kind of a systems view of different interactions across the individual elements that we just talked about in both soft tissue, bone, as well as the bacteria. So at the center is the bacterium, P. gingivalis, and the yellow rectangles are part of immune system. The green ones form the bone system, and the blue one is the soft tissue or the gum tissue. We also have the endothelial cell, which is part of the vasculature that is present in the oral cavity as well. So we, as we mentioned earlier, once you have the excessive growth of these bad bacteria, they release these endotoxins or virulence factors that have their own effect on each of these cell types. So let me walk you through some of these here. So we had flagellin and gingipains, which are actually known to have in interactions with the ligands or the receptors on epithelial cells. That's the cell from the gum. And once they land there on the surface of those cells, they will start a cascade of reactions that lead to usually in the gum cells inflammatory environment, meaning that the epithelial cell will create a lot of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, once those cytokines are produced, they actually help in engaging the immune system. So if it is in control, the immune system will come in and take care of the bacteria. But if it goes out of control, that means you have a lot more of flagellin and gingipains, then you're creating a lot more of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. And that is just like a call for action, and the immune system gets overwhelmed and it starts creating pro-inflammatory molecules. And that creates a very strong pro-inflammatory environment, which leads to the swelling of the gums and the ultimate destruction of the soft tissue. And that's just the interaction between the soft tissue and the immune system and the bacterium. But we also have the bone system, that is the osteoclast and the osteoblast and the ligament cells.
Prabhakar, would it be good to do it from the other diagrams? Because I think
right. So I have if we go here, and that way I can show you these three examples where I can go into details of how these reactions are taking place. So I have chosen the gum tissue, the epithelial cells of the gum tissue, and the virulence factor that I'll walk you through is the gingipains. And the biomarkers associated with the attack from the gingipains are the interleukins, IL-6, IL-8, and IL-beta. And the biological effect of those biomarkers is going to be inflammation. So for bone tissue, we have flagellin that upregulates the biomarker of rankle, and that's implicated in the destruction of bone. For the immune system, we'll look at how LPS is upregulating the biomarker TNF-alpha, which is responsible for creating inflammation as well as recruitment of the inflammatory immune cells. So first, we have the epithelial cell here. Receptor HAR2.
Prabhakar, one point. Prabhakar, I just want to make
sure.
Step back a little bit to all of you listening. I know we're hitting you with a lot of information, but this blue square that you see here, that is an example of what we're calling an epithelial cell. And Prabhakar, where do these epithelial cells typically occur in the mouth?
So they occur in gum, cheek,
yep.
As well as a tongue. The salivary cells are also made of epithelial cells.
So if you went in and you took a microscope and you looked at your gum, the epithelial cells are the lining of that. But that's what the blue square here represents the epithelial cell. And I know some of you may have never seen a diagram like this. Every of those little orange boxes that you see there is a chemical, which is involved in a chemical reaction that's taking place normally in the epithelial cell. And what you see here, the key point you want to look at is the input there, which is gingipanes, which is a chemical, a compound that is created by the bad bacteria. And what you can see here is when that enters your epithelial cell, you don't want that stuff, but when it does, it'll cleave that protein, which means split it. And then you don't need to know all the details of the rest, but it just basically creates like a domino effect. All these reactions go do, right? As you're seeing here. And the yellow box right there is your nucleus. So remember, a cell has the outer, which is what the outer circle Prabhakar can trace. All the blue in the middle is your cytoplasm. And that yellow is a nuclear processes where your DNA is. But you notice that chemical called C-Jun enters, okay, on the top, and another chemical on the bottom called P50 enters from below. Just all of that caused by that gingipanes coming in. So that creates all these chemical reactions. C-Jun comes in and the P50 comes in, and guess what it does? The P50, P65, that goes and literally initiates your DNA through the process of transcription to create these 4 not so good proteins in green: IL-8, IL-6, IL-1 beta. In fact, a lot of IL-8. And these are, Prabhakar, if you go to the previous slide, these are the inflammatory, right there, markers, and they result in inflammation. So simply put, we just walked you through the molecular system circuitry. Again, this took a lot of pain for us to organize all this data, to even build this diagram over the last 3 years. Next. So that's just one phenomenon. The other thing is there's another virulent factor called flagellin. Again, we're looking at, this is a bone cell. The other was an epithelial cell. The blue here now is a bone cell. Flagellin comes in, hits TLR5, which is what's that, Prabhakar?
Is the receptor for
Yes.
flagellin. That means it receives this virulent factor.
And that goes through all these cascades of reactions, especially at the bottom, that interconnects, if you notice, from TRAF6 through this reaction. And then at the end of the day, remember, this is a bone cell. And what does it do? It creates this protein called RANKL, RANKL. And again, the P50, P65 is generated, which sits on your genes, and it tells your DNA to make that protein, RANKL. Go back, Prabhakar, 2 slides. And the RANKL, as we discussed here, causes bone destruction. So you see, flagellin comes in from the bad bacteria, and your bones start getting destroyed. Let's go to the third example here. So now you're looking at the immune cell, next, macrophage. Remember, macrophages are those cells in your body that go in when you're under attack by bacteria, parasites, or viruses, they go try to attack them. They're like the Marines. They go and try to envelop it and destroy the invader. They surround it and they do what's called phagocytosis. And here, LPS is the virulent factor coming from the bacterium. That goes through a process, as you see here, whole bunch of reactions here. And at the end result, you get TNF alpha, okay? Now, obviously, under normal conditions, where you have proper inflammation, you get that. But under this condition, next, go back, Prabhakar, 3 more slides, the TNF alpha gets produced, and that leads to inflammation and the recruitment of inflammatory cells. So now you have the quote unquote cytokine storm, where you have an overreaction of your immune system. Okay, thank you. Next slide, Prabhakar. So
I'm just going to refresh the screen so that
Prabhakar's going to refresh the screen because
it
looks like there's something with Zoom when people are able to sort of draw, and it looks like they're hacking our system or drawing it, and a number of us were concerned by that. Okay, let's go back to this. So I'm going to do the first, Prabhakar, maybe you want to, I think I'll do the part of this. Let's just go right into this because we understood the microbiome. So now we want to, Prabhakar, stay on the previous slide. Yeah. So just in quick summary, what we've done right now is Michelle's walked through the history of masks, where they came from, the politics of it, the controversy around it. We then walked through really understanding the fact that the masks from the data to date have some very, it's unclear whether they really even protect you. Then we went through the discussion on periodontal disease, the bacteria, and then we just walked you through fresh science on, at the molecular systems level, how these bacteria come, the fact that these bacteria are chemical machineries, they put out different chemicals, and how those chemicals then lead to inflammation, tooth decay, bone loss, etc. Okay? So let's just put that aside over here, right? So let's just sort of, I don't want to say forget about it, but think about, you just got sort of a deep university education on the microbiome, on molecular systems, etc., which many dentists probably today don't even, dental research centers understand this, but most dentists typically don't get that in their, dental medicine education. Probably not many doctors either. But you have been exposed now to really understand the microbiome, the bacteria, etc. So put that over here. Now we're going to sort of switch gears and we're going to ask the question, what is the effect of masks on the oral microbiome, and what's the implications of oral health? And Prabhakar, if I'm right, earlier on in the symposium, you shared some of the evidence coming out, right, from some of the dentists.
Right.
Dr. Raimondi is going to be with us on a follow-up. He's the dentist in New York who came out publicly, and he said that he actually has seen a 50% increase in his own patient's mouth who, since masks came on, gum disease plus tooth decay. And a number of dentists have started observing this. But now what we wanted to do is, given the background at the molecular systems level we've shared, we wanted to really look at what is the effects of masks on the oral microbiome, those bacteria. Do masks create more beneficial bacteria, or do they create the conditions for bad bacteria? Because remember the importance of the oral microbiome, and what is the implications for oral health? Next. So one of the things that and there's a significant amount of evidence on this. So if you notice on the top left, when you look at the individual there, wearing face masks creates a microenvironment, right? So the normal individuals up on top, that's a control. On the next thing, you see an individual wearing a mask. And what do you see here? Well, they're wearing the face mask it's a completely new microenvironment. So think about, it's like a different whole world that you've created around the mouth. And you can just see it in the picture. You can see it, it's around the nose, a very different area on the mouth, and around the chin. You've created a very different environment that didn't exist before. And this microenvironment it impacts heat exchange. You could go to MIT or engineering school and you could study thermodynamics, which is all about heat exchange. Ask your local HVAC guy. They study heat exchange, okay? But what you see happen here is that respiratory heat loss is impaired, because remember, when you breathe out, you're supposed to remove heat from your body, right? That's one of the aspects of breathing. You breathe in and you breathe out. When you breathe out, you're supposed to put out heat. Now, if you're wearing this mask, what happens? You're not able to get that heat out, which is cool your body, and that heat burden is increased inside that dome, inside of that microenvironment. And what the research shows from a number of sources, including published in PubMed and NIH, is that the facial temperature, which means on the surface of the face, rose as high as 1.5 to 2 degrees. That's like you have a fever, right? So the surface temperature of the face now is increasing in temperature from 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees. Next. Now, in a lot of the work that I did many, many years ago in a field called Tadoma, where deafblind people communicate. Deafblind people, by the way, are not able to communicate with people through, because they can't. They can't hear, nor can they see. But deafblind people literally put their hands on people's faces, and it's a feature that people are only. We were doing research back in the 80s trying to understand how are people communicating by just putting their hand. Well, it turns out the fingers of your hand are highly tactile, and they can sense all sorts of things: breath, heat, etc. But it turns out the face has the highest concentration of thermoreceptors. What does that mean? Well, you know, your body has the ability to sense heat or temperature. So the most amount of thermoreceptors, because of evolution, are really around your face, right around in this area. Why is that important? Well, those sensors on your skin, which can, you know, sense temperature, tells your brain how to cool or heat your body. Okay, so when you put that mask on, you're basically indicating, you're basically increase the temperature of the body, and you can see what implications that could have, because your body may think it's too hot, it may start trying to cool itself when it frankly isn't hot. So the research that's been done, when you look at the oral temperature increase inside your body, okay, inside the cavity, that goes up from 0.11 to 0.27 degrees. Look, these are not small amounts, because your body tries to maintain a homeostasis. So you've increased the temperature inside. This is in the oral cavity, not on the surface. And the difference in oral temperatures, as we noticed in this research that was done, is different. So the N95 mask, the one that tightly fits around you, healthcare workers have to wear it. Well, look at that, increases your temperature from by 0.27, negative 0.8 to 1.6. That's the range, okay? And in the surgical mask, it's 0.11. And the p-value there is telling how good that research is, right? So low p-value means it's pretty good, okay? So clearly it's increasing the oral temperature increase. Next. Now, this is a wonderful piece of research, because when you look at the oral cavity, right, there are many things that affect the bacteria, okay? So previous slide, Prabhakar, the point here, takeaway here is you put the mask on, the temperature is going up on the surface, temperature is going on inside your mouth. Next. So the question now is, well, does that affect the microbiome? We've already had this long discussion about the microbiome. Well, the research that was done here, what it's shown is there are many, many factors which affect the microbiome, okay? Time and aging, okay? But you can see there's environmental factors over there. There's habits and lifestyle, right? There's genetics. Some ethnicities have different types of bacteria. Your circadian rhythms, which is how you sleep, right? Or your rhythms in your body, how your body works with the natural cycles of the earth and the movement of planets and all those things. Do you have any particular medical conditions? But as you can see, what Dr. Dinarkar is pointing to is temperature. Temperature is one of the ingredients that affects the center, the composition of the oral microbiome, right there. So there's research that's showing, that's conclusively done, that says the temperature affects the microbiome. Now, the oral cavity is kept at a constant temperature between 34 to 36 degrees Celsius. And the oral microbiome, which is all those beautiful bacteria, the healthy ones, are sensitive to changes in temperature. And what the research has shown is prolonged higher temperatures may lead to inflammatory oral environment. And that phenomenon may likely explain what's going on when you have these dentists consistently showing that they've seen not just a small, but a rapid change in people's oral health. But the temperature is affecting the microbiome, okay? The temperature is affecting the microbiome. Next. And now the changes in the oral temperature may induce another set of research, functional gene expression in the oral bacteria. So what does that mean? The bacteria themselves have their own genetic machinery. Okay, they have they have genes, and they're remember, bacteria are constantly mutating, right? That's one of the things with bacteria. They're constantly mutating. So if the temperature changes, what this is saying is it can affect at the genetic level, genetic mutations in the bacteria. So over a long period of time, these changes may favor pathogenic and not beneficial bacteria, all those lactobacilli. And the rise in temperature has been associated with the presence of pathogenic bacteria. I'll repeat that again. The rise in temperature has been associated with pathogenic bacteria. Now, the increase in that pathogenic bacteria we just talked about will subsequently cause periodontal disease. Next. So that's one thing, temperature, right? The other piece is wearing masks does something else. Over extended periods of time, you reduce the salivary flow, okay? You don't get, and your mouth is not supposed to be dry, you know? People get dry mouth, some people as they get older, right? But the salivary flow gets reduced. And so if you have less saliva, because you don't have hydration, because of mask wearing, you change that microbial balance that we talked about, right? Where you want the good bacteria, and the good bacteria at high levels stop the bad bacteria. So wearing masks over extended periods of time reduces your salivary flow. Well, why is saliva important? Well, one of the main reasons saliva is important is for your oral pH. Well, what is pH? pH is a measure. pH, H refers to hydrogen ions. It's a measure of hydrogen ions in your mouth. You can get litmus, pH paper, and you can measure it. A high pH means your body's alkaline, okay? A low pH means your body is acidic. 7 means it's around neutral, okay? So the maintenance of the oral pH, which means its balance, now the oral cavity is kept, if you look at the last bullet, at a reasonably constant pH between 6.75 and 7.25, okay? But when you have saliva, when you reduce the saliva, that's gonna change the oral pH. That's gonna affect the microbiome nutrition. It's gonna affect lubrication. It's gonna affect cleansing, right? And it's gonna affect immune protection, right? So all these things get affected when you wear masks, because it's lowering the saliva flow. Next. So this is a wonderful diagram that's really explains this balance. So if you look at a seesaw, as I talked about before, on the right, you have the increase. There are certain things that increase your pH, right? You want an alkaline pH, right? Just higher pH. So hydrogen peroxide, right? Some of these toothpastes have that. Proteases, bacteriocins, okay? When you have high of that, the blue indicates a beneficial bacteria, okay? So on the right, you get, and you get a healthy biofilm, okay? So on the right, when you have, in order to have beneficial bacteria, beneficial microbiome, you're looking for a higher pH. When your pH gets lower, which means what? That occurs when you have acidity, right? It's more acid, and that is a function, as you can see, of low saliva flow. Low saliva flow increases acidity, lowers your pH, and guess what? This becomes an initiator of causing more of the bad microbiome or the bad bacteria, the virulence factors. And this basically makes your mouth, readily fermentable, right, for carbohydrates. And this is where your mouth starts creating biofilm, the plaque. Initially, it's a film. Some of you may wake up where you maybe ate some horrible food and you just notice your mouth is just with a film on it, okay? This occurs when your body gets acidic. Why does this happen? Remember, if your body gets acidic, the body tries to protect itself by putting out a biofilm, all right? This happens in many other areas of disease, but you can see on the right, to keep it simple, the blue bacteria go up when you have higher pH. When you have lower pH from low saliva flow, more orange stuff, which means bad bacteria. Next. So the question is, this is what we are at today. As Michelle talked about earlier, we're seeing places which say no entry without face masks. So no entry without face masks, it's purported to be a very good thing. So the mask, and you get the green check mark, everything's great. Well, you're reducing from the science, you're lowering the saliva, you're lowering your pH, which increases bad bacteria. And the red with the X, which is supposed to, I think, teach us that's bad, we're finding is not so bad, because without the mask, your body's at the normal temperature, your pH is up, and relatively from the research, you're gonna have less bad bacteria. Next, so I think the question we need to, oops, did we miss? Yeah, so going back to this, if we look at this, you see these bacterial factors, okay, are gonna be increased when you have the conditions that we're talking about that lead to lower pH and, lower saliva, higher temperature, and that leads to all these different biomarkers that we talked about as Dr. Diernecker walked you through very carefully through all those circuit diagrams. These start getting created. Next. And we've just shown that. So the real issue is maybe we should more ask a question. No entry without face mask, which really leads to the person with the mask who has low saliva flow, and perhaps a person at the right who may have better oral health by the fact that they're not wearing that face mask. And again, remember, this all varies with the individual. As I've said before, one size does not fit all. We've talked about this before at some of our other seminars. I think about a year ago, we did a whole seminar. The International Center for Integrative Systems did a whole thing on beyond vax, anti-vax, where we talked about vaccines, and we talked about the need to really look at precision and personalized medicine. This is going to vary for different people. Some people may have a pre-existing conditions, et cetera. They put those masks on and they're going to have, the low saliva flow much faster than others. And other people, maybe they'll be fine. But the point is we really need to recognize this fundamental issue at a molecular systems level. Next. Okay, I'll hand it back to Dr. Diernecker.
So I just wanted to bring it all back together where we started, as far as tying the oral microbiome, the masks and its implications on the oral health, and the oral microbiome, and what kind of diseases that it leads to. So as we talked about it before, oral health is a key driver for a systemic health because it is implicated in several diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, even anxiety, as well as the pulmonary diseases like COPD, some of the cancers, even in preterm and low birth weight, it is implicated. In addition to that, if we have a disbalance in the microbiome, that means you have more of the bad bacteria present, they can actually cause specific diseases. For example, spirochetes and P. gingivalis have been implicated in pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. So there are several bacteria involved in cardiovascular disease, including P. gingivalis, cystic fibrosis, esophageal cancer, colorectal cancer, diabetes, pancreatic cancer, and of course, the periodontitis and the dental caries. So I'll stop there and we'll open this for question and answers.
We'll give it back to Jen.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Diernecker. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. We've been getting a bunch of questions in the chat. So again, if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask, please just send me a direct message and I can read them off to the team. Janie had a question regarding a link in the oral microbiome and autism. Is that anything that you guys came up or saw in your research?
Well, I think I can speak to that. We've spoken before on that, on the, I don't know if we have the slide on the immune system, Prabhakar. I don't know if you can bring up one of those, our diagram. Some of you may know about, in November 2019, I was asked to give the talk at the National Science Foundation on the immune system. And we also shared that in a number of other talks, but Dr. Diernecker will try to bring that up. But one of the important things, Jamie, is the following. When you look at the mouth has, like we said, all these different bacteria. And the mouth microbiome is also related to other microbiome. For example, the microbiome in your gut. And the gut bacteria, your gut in some ways is your lower brain. When people use this word autism, I would like to, it's a word that's become so used out there. A lot of people don't even know what it is. I'd rather use a more scientific term related to what's called neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation, which means inflammation of the brain, which has been implicated in various neurovascular diseases. By the way, as Dr. Diernecker is showing here, you see that this is really a much more accurate architecture of the immune system than what's been unfortunately used for the last 100 years, which is just the two blue boxes. If you read, most doctors typically understand the innate immune system and the adaptive. But the reality is there's the interferon system, there's a microbiome environment in your mouth, your gut, which talks to the neural system, okay? So the important thing is what some of the very recent discoveries are: as above, so below, or as below, so above. If you have fundamental things going on in your gut, your mouth, right, the microbiome, well, that is talking up through your brain. So you invariably find people who have disturbances in the microbiome also have disturbances leading to neural inflammation in the brain. So I can say, if you want to put, everyone says autism is spectrum disorder. Well, it's been closely related to neuroinflammation. So I'd rather use the word neuroinflammation, which is inflammation of the brain. And that's very closely related to changes in the microbiome. More interestingly, there are spirochetes in your mouth. And if you don't take care of mouth well, these are things, creatures that also show up in your brain. And there's some interesting developments showing with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all these different diseases, which are neurovascular diseases. They're a function of mouth health, oral health. I hope that answers that question. Prabhakar, did you want to add to that?
Neuroinflammation, which is a part of several brain-related diseases, also occurs in Alzheimer's disease, and it is directly related to these oral bacteria.
Well, the spirochetes,
Yeah,
which are
spirochetes.
similar to the bacterial structure that when you have syphilis and
Right.
syphilis, if you look at those bacteria, they literally have like a corkscrew through them. They're sort of dangerous looking, like they could drill up through into you, which they do.
Thank you. We have another question from Pamela. She's wondering, at what age can a child understand if they're having breathing problems or issues wearing a mask? It seems to me they should be exempt like a disabled person is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, every child is different, but what I can talk to is there's some, we've been getting some very interesting questions about, I understand there's mask regulations being passed for kids at the school level. One thing we do know is there's a plasticity, meaning just like the word means, that the things are molding and remodeling. Like you could mold plastic, and that plasticity means your microbiome and your microbiome health. When you're young, that microbiome and all these things are being put in place and they're being developed as you're born, etc. Now, clearly from the work we've just shown you here, when you put the mask on, you're increasing temperature, affecting saliva, affecting pH, affecting temperature. Clearly that must have effects on the oral microbiome of that child as they're developing. And that can likely, affect the oral microbiome in the mouth, and the implications of that short-term and long-term of oral health to the child, because during that period of childhood and puberty, I'm sure, is when the oral microbiome is sort of coming together. It's building its own homeostasis. So one could argue that this can have probably even more profound effects on children, and it's something that should be researched.
Thank you. To add to that, because what's happening with a lot of people today is that they're forced to wear masks to keep their job. So we have a couple of questions of what people should do if they're forced to wear one. Is there anything that they can do to help regain the appropriate pH and oral microbiome after a work day?
That's a good question. One of the main things that you'll hear a lot of the practicing dentists say over and over again, and Dr. Dienerker, you may want to, from your own research, is hydration. One of the things we've constantly heard is hydration, 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 because what does hydration do? It supports your pH. So clearly, Jennifer, whoever asked that, hydration becomes even more important. And if you're working in an office, and they have the AC and they have blowing air, you're going to create more dryness here. And I think, as Dr. Dienerker is bringing up, as Dr. Raimondi and others have said, you want to drink more water. Caffeine is a diuretic, right? Snag a humidifier, help moisturize the air. Use an alcohol-free mouthwash. Alcohol, as you know, dries it out. Scrape your tongue, and obviously don't smoke. So if you're a smoker, you don't clean your tongue. You're using the alcohol mouthwashes. the winter is coming here in the Northeast, right? Things get even more dry. So this could be a recipe for serious issues, right? You're not drinking water, you're drinking, 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee. You're living in an environment where things are dry. You're significantly affecting your oral microbiome health. Now, there are we have some very good data in some of the research we're doing. As many of you know, the research we do for the center is purely as volunteer scientists, but in another aspect of our lives, we're starting to figure out what are the combination of things that can support the mouth. And we're finding some very interesting data on substances like neem, substances like simple things like hydrogen peroxide, baking powder. These things seem to have a very powerful way to support your health. In traditional systems of medicine, they did 2 very interesting things. They used what's called oil pulling. When you got up in the morning, you put a teaspoon of oil, sesame seed oil or coconut oil, and you just swished it in your mouth because it connected with the other non-polar things and you threw it out. The other thing is typically after a meal in many traditional cultures, you did water pulling, drink some water, squish it around your mouth, gargle and put it out because you want to get out the stuff out of your mouth. So these things can just support the microbiome in your mouth.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, one of the things we may do, Jennifer,
Yeah.
we thought about, we may put together a protocol based on the science and to give to people. And we're even thinking about suggesting certain kinds of ingredients that may also support oral health, but we'll get back to everyone on that. Everyone who's on this list will send you a follow-up.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Some other questions that we've gotten around that topic as far as knowing what brands of products they should use, right? Whether it be alcohol or non-alcohol mouthwash and, food recommendations. So I think, any follow-up we can provide, just giving the listeners examples so they, can apply it for their own overall health would be great. Let's see, I'm going to take a couple more questions. Let's see. A lot of questions about the presentation. So yes, the presentation will be available. This is being recorded. So those that have access to the center will be able to view this on demand as well. Let's see. I just want to go. Melissa had a question if there's been an increase in MRSA cases around the nose and mouth area due to masks.
Prabhakar, do you want to answer that? We didn't really specifically query the literature in that regard, but I mean, MRSA is, the infections are more common in the hospital settings, and historically they have been on the rise because of several factors, including antibiotic resistance. But it's one of those hospital diseases. So if you are hospitalized, then you're more likely to get one of those, not just MRSA, but there are other bacteria that have been shown to have developed resistance to these antibacterials. But in terms of oral health, I mean, we have to contend with the bacteria inside our oral microbiome, and MRSA as such, as far as my information is concerned, is not concerned for oral microbiome, but I'm not sure. I mean, there might be, I think MRSA also affects some other organ systems, so its presence in oral microbiome will more than likely be detected and taken care of immediately. But if it ends up in other organ systems, it might develop as a disease.
Dr. Dinarkar, one of the things that, if you sort of look at this out there, people have talked about this broadly, but more importantly, there's another phenomenon with masks. It's just the hygiene of the masks. We've talked to people where in a family, people have these little mask bins. People come in the house, the son, the daughter, the the husband, the wife, everyone throws their masks in a bin. And when they go out, they just choose anyone else's mask and they wear them when they go. There's no washing of those masks. Sometimes masks are just lying around. It's sort of quite unhygienic, okay? Which may just have to do with, just wearing dirty socks all the time, okay? And you're wearing other people's socks. Maybe you're gonna get foot fungus from someone, you know what I'm saying? So there's another phenomenon going on here with this world of people wearing masks, and how is the SOP, the standard of process in a home, and how are the masks being treated? Are they being washed? Are you using the same thing? Are people sharing masks, et cetera? So I would rather say this is a result of, at minimum, we have to do more research
Right.
on other behavioral events that are taking place, independent of what we're talking about, the oral cavity and the microbiome.
Right. This kind of reminds me of an earlier slide that we did. I don't know if I can find it right now, but what they say, this was one of these clinical studies that they did about the efficacy of masks and how like people are kind of gung-ho on recommending masks to spread to prevent the spread of the disease, but they're actually neglecting the consequences of these measures, which we're kind of trying to find out now, how it affects the oral health, how it might affect this psychological health because of social isolation. So even though their prescription is for the spread of the disease, control the spread of disease, but their side effects are pretty consequential. So you had to strike that balance. Otherwise, and I guess this is the kind of a problem with the whole medical establishment, that you don't really understand the consequences before you prescribe.
Well, I think the other part of it is to understand that, as Jennifer pointed out, the center we're proud to be a part of is really around a systems approach, an integrative systems approach, where you look at systems not in isolated ways. So if you look at them in an isolated way, you're going to get to results which are what people would call cherry picking. But when you're looking at it from an interconnected way, you get you understand things from a more holistic approach, from a systems approach.
Right.
One of the listeners was sharing how that at their 6-month dental checkup, the dentist kept saying that they should use the mouthwash so their mouth would stay moist. But found it interesting that, the dentist never mentioned, any of this information as far as why that was happening.
Jennifer, if you look at the typical dental medical training or the medical training, the notion of looking at the body as a system is not part of that medical training. It is, if this occurs, do this. If this occurs, do this. If this occurs, do this. It's more like, if this, do this. And part of that is you look at things in isolation. If this occurs over here, then do the mouthwash and that's going to take care of it. Maybe not understanding that the person's diet is going to affect them. Maybe not understanding that person's particular work. Maybe they work in a place where it's a very, very dry environment. And now they're starting to take a mask and they're using an alcohol-based mouthwash. Well, that's a recipe, as we talked about, for creating a very different environment in the mouth, lower saliva, dry mouth. That's going to lead to the phenomenon we just shared at the molecular level. You're affecting and changing that microbiome balance.
Yeah, and I'll just add that a lot of people are sharing some of their personal stories and testimonies of different health conditions that they have, and wondering now if this is related to their dental health, especially when a lot of these people are reporting that they've had root canals and many cavities and gum disease and so forth. So I think this information is very helpful for a lot of listeners who have unfortunately experienced some of these things as a result of our oral health.
Yeah, I think when we put out our final paper, people want to get that later on. We have some interesting data in there. If you talk to most cardiologists, they will now tell you, it's very clear that mouth health and cardiovascular health are so intertwined. It's almost, you have to be very concerned for those people with cardiovascular issues. Even if you talk to some dentists who are take a systems-based approach, when you're getting deep cleaning done, or you're doing different kinds of regular dental work, you should be concerned about your heart health and take some prophylactic approach to deal with that. The systems-based dentists who look beyond just looking at the mouth, but look more holistically, understand this. But I think the mouth is, I mean, we use it every day, talking, eating. I mean, it's probably one of the most used direct organs that so is affected by different types of bacteria, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I would like to also add, there's a lot of people that are sharing some great information in the chat and different resources. So if you have any research papers and anything that you'd like to share with the center, please feel free to email info@integrativesystems.org. I don't want to miss any of this information, because some people are taking the time to share some things that they've been researching and studying as well, some other healthcare professionals. Let's see. There's also been a lot of questions, Dr. Shiva, on bacterial pneumonia as a result, of the prolonged use of mask wearing.
Yeah, I mean, there was, if you go look back at the Spanish flu, and people did a retrospective study, and this has been something that's been controversial, that people said, well, look, it was bacterial pneumonia combined with the virus, if you want to take a conservative view, which caused a lot of deaths. The issue is, did the masks, create the bacterial pneumonia? It's an interesting question. We haven't had a chance, frankly, to go research that. Our work today and what we presented here is really to take a bottoms-up systems approach to understand the chemical reactions in the mouth, how those reactions are affected by the microbiome, which we've shown, and how that microbiome changes, leads to other disease states. So what we can say is, these symbiotic healthy bacteria live when you have, certain proper conditions, the right pH, the right temperature, the right saliva. When you don't have that, you're going to create other phenomenon. So where the microbiome is changed, obviously we know that creates other diseases. So is that microbiome change related to bacterial pneumonia? Well, you could, if you wanted to argue that, you definitely know, as what we've just shared today, we've noticed that the changes in the microbiome affect bone health, affect gum disease, but also affect your immune health. Well, if your immune health is affected, that means your body's more susceptible to bacterial infections, e.g. pneumonia, okay? So I would always like to not go look at the end result of what you're seeing, but, peel away the onions there a couple of times and go look at where all this is coming. And we've shared with you today at the guts of this sort of operating system is your body has a certain set of molecular engine under the right fuel, which is the right microbiome. It maintains itself. Under the wrong fuel, wrong microbiome, it then cascades like that domino effect all the way down to all sorts of diseases. So I think we want to go to the root of the problem here, because the other stuff just becomes conjecture, et cetera. So we want to go to the molecular systems approach here. And we hope we've educated people on that tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Thank you, Dr. Daneker. Also, as a quick reminder, Dr. Daneker, if you just want to go to vashiva.com/shop, that is where you will be able to find this research and the white papers that will be coming soon. I can say for myself, speaking as a mother, having this access to this type of information and resources is very helpful, because I think this is all about, educating and empowering one another. So we are armed with the right information so we can educate our neighbors and also, educate some of the practitioners and so forth when we have these questions and concerns. So please check out here if you'd like to get access to that research and the graphs and all this great information that's been shared tonight. So Dr. Shiva is just going to wrap up now with future questions. And again, we will be having some follow-ups to this as well.
I think one of the things we want to mention, Jen, I don't know if you mentioned that about, our future research.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, so the big thing, right, is
Oh, here it is. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Yep, the future research. Yep. And any fund proceeds that go to this is going to help us fund future research in this area. So that's, a big thing as part of this, bottoms up movement, and really, again, empowering our communities and so forth is, being citizen science and citizen scientists, right? And getting access to this, great scientific information. So we are doing the right things for our families and our communities.
Yeah, so part of that, so what we've shared with you today, in some ways is a foundational area. It's breakthrough research, but there are many, many questions, because if you look at what's going on politically, socially, policy making wise, when we go back to that seesaw diagram we shared with you, there is this one viewpoint, one scientific viewpoint, which says the mask wearing leads to this benefit. And what we've shared with you today, saying maybe there's another also part of this reality that we should consider what goes on with the oral health. And so what has not been done in one of our areas of future research is literally putting together risk benefit analysis. Okay, what's the benefit of wearing a mask and not wearing a mask? And given their likely and projected detrimental health. And what, in the preliminary way we've sort of looked at this in some thought experiments, is this, that may vary based on your particular health state. So someone who has diabetes, maybe is 400 pounds over, a couple hundred pounds overweight, them wearing a mask. And by the way, those people are the ones who have a high proclivity for COVID and coronavirus, and frankly, any other types of infections. The effects of a mask wearing on them may be probably very different than a mask wearing on a healthy individual. It could be. But so we need to look at that risk benefit. That's one of the areas of research we're going to be doing. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, given these policy questions are important, our center, which we don't really see happening anywhere else in the world, most places in the world, and I'm talking about the major institutions, they're typically focused on getting a grant. And that grant, unfortunately, these days is politically motivated. It's not motivated and to look at it objectively. Our goal, as we've shared today, is we've gone through thousands of pieces of literature and congealed them. So this is why I think Pamela talked about this, asked the question. We need to do a deep dive research on the difference between the microbiome of a child and an adult. So how does the mask wearing affect pediatric dental health? Given the plasticity, which means the changing molding that's going on in a child's microbiome when they grow. The third area of research that we're looking at is what are the, we saw some of the temperature effects, but what are the oral health, dental differences, the dental effects? We have healthcare workers. Some of you may have healthcare workers in your family. They got to wear that N95 mask for, it fully covers. We notice the temperature is higher. How's the quantitative means the damages that it's causing relative to the amount of bacteria, relative to the cloth and versus a surgical. This is another area that we want to do. And then finally, the fourth one is we need to develop also an economic, we're a systems center. We don't just we look at health and how it affects economics too, because they're interrelated. How, we need to develop a model on the typical notion of wearing masks is it's a way, to make sure you're stopping the transmission of disease. There's another model which talks about herd immunity. There's another model that we're bringing to the ground in a very, I think, a very important way. One of the first is, to the best of our knowledge, is that this is going to cause dental issues, dental diseases. What is the economic impact of that layered on whether you don't wear masks, and epidemiologically what that means and what are we seeing? We're starting to see individual dentists point this out, like Dr. Raimondi and others. But what is that? What is those impact. So these are some of the questions. Next, I think we had one other. Next slide.
That's it.
That's it. So these are some of the 4 important questions, our center wants to do. Obviously, this requires time and effort and resources. So this is one of the things we're going to be moving on. So this is the first symposium. We'll probably over the next 3 to 6 months conduct another one. But our goal really at our center, as Jennifer said, is to create a better world. And a better world really comes through education. And the education requires, in some ways, where it requires research, but the notion of that research should be a systems approach, which means you look at multiple factors. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're muted, Jennifer.
Jennifer, you're muted. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. If we did not get to your questions, again, please feel free to go to integrativesystems.org and go to the Contact Us section, and you can submit your question there, or email us at info@integrativesystems.org, and we'll review those. And we look forward to continuing this research and discussion with all of you. Please, share this information and resources with your family, with your neighbors, and together we can make this community, our world, a better place. So thank you, Dr. Shiva, Dr. Dianakar, and Michelle for your resources and research this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome.